So if somebody were to contact me and say, "Hey, like I want to do a series of books, would you be my illustrator?" I would ask immediately for a contract. Because I could illustrate something and they could use it for their first book. But if I don't have that contract in place, they could hire another artist to do like similar artistry for the next book and not have me come back for it. So to protect the intellectual property that is mine, I would want to have a contract in place. But also, I think authors need to be realistic about what they are going to be spending on an illustrator, and to be comfortable with that, especially because the traditional number of pages for a children's book is about 32 pages. And most illustrators will charge per page. There also is going to be in your contract a revision clause, and the revision clause is there to protect the illustrator. It really stinks to think of it from the author's perspective, because yes, you do want to make those changes to your book, but there's only so many times that an illustrator can make certain changes, and they're always going to be small changes. If you want to change something large, like adding an additional character, or maybe you want to change like a scene in its entirety, that means that the illustrator has to redo the entire thing, and it just takes so much more for the illustrator to do. And as an author illustrator, I will say it is significantly harder to make a children's book from the author's perspective. From the illustrator's perspective, because I was able to write When Dinosaurs Dream in an hour. It took me about 8 weeks to illustrate it. So just thinking about it in that kind of respect, especially depending on the type of illustration that you want to go for, because there's digital art, of course, and then there's what I do, which is the watercolor. Llama Llama was done in acrylics. So it's really up to you, the kind of style design that you want to have in place. Something that is like a full illustration page is going to cost way more than something that is just a very basic, as I mentioned before, a quokka with daisies in its head with a white background. That would not cost very much. But something that is a full page color, like what I have in one of my, like the book of colors, that would be significantly more. So that's just something for people to keep in mind.
Okay, everyone, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. I have an amazingly talented illustrator. I'm on her website right now, and it is gorgeous. From portraits to animal pictures that are done. Oh, there's a dog that's just gorgeous. Rae Wright is with me, Rae Wright Artistry, but also an author extraordinaire working on book number 4. And she's got some great Canva tips for us today as well. Rae, welcome to Living the Next Chapter. Great to have you here.
Oh, it's so nice to be here. Thank you.
Again, I love your website. I'm on there right now. RaeWrightArtistry.ca. .ca, for everyone listening at home, is a Canadian website. So I'm in Canada. You're in Canada. Where are you in this great country of ours?
I am in down just outside of Toronto. So yeah, just south of Toronto.
Good. So that's good. So I'm in Niagara, and we're not too far away from each other. We should grab a Tim Hortons someday. For those listening, they're like, "What's a Tim Hortons?" Right? Yeah, we call it Timmy's, and we have Timbits, and there's so many things to talk about there. Yes. Great to have you here, Rae. Tell us a little bit about your artwork and your artistry website. How long have you been being an illustrator? Take us on that journey first.
For sure. So I actually started my business teaching art classes, and I kind of evolved from there, where I was painting and drawing a little bit more than I was teaching. And I mean, when COVID hit and everything kind of shut down, I got really into my artwork, and I had children during that last couple of years. So I have 2 kids now. Decided I was going to start writing stories for them. And it just kind of evolved where I started making children's books. But like how I became an artist and everything, that was just a lot of time practicing. When I was a kid, I started painting and drawing when I was little, as most children do. And it kind of followed me into being a teenager. And then down into like being an adult and everything. And I just never really put the paintbrush down for a great length of time. There was like a 6 year period there where I didn't paint because I was dealing with some medical issues. But after that all got resolved and I made this one big painting for my surgeon, I was just like, you know what, here's a thank you. And I made him a painting and I handed it to him and I was like, yeah, let's never stop. So kept on going. And now I promote artistry as like a form of mental health for children and adults. And yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, like I said, I love your pastels. I'm like again going through your website as we're chatting, and
Yeah.
it's so there's so these things look like they could just like move on the page. Like they're
Yeah.
so realistic. I love it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, like I started off with doing more realistic stuff than I did anything before I actually got into doing more illustrative things because I find cartoons are a little bit more difficult for me than realism. But yeah, like acrylics and pastels and watercolor. I'm very new to watercolor. I've only been doing it for about a year and a half, 2 years now. But I've definitely, I think, found my medium with that because I very, very much love painting with watercolors.
Well, it's amazing. I'm looking at the elephant strength on your website. And yeah, it just looks like this elephant's going to start moving. It's so realistic. It's beautiful.
Thank
Um,
you.
talk about the leap then from your artistry into your writing career. What kind of skills and talents were a natural um, avenue for you to take from your artistry into writing? What kind of things really helped you as an author, being an artist?
Yeah, so the jump from being an artist to being an author was actually um, fairly fluid to go from one to the other because when you do artistry, you're telling a story with a picture. And then you just kind of continue on with that story and it just becomes its own story. And there have been times like when I wrote the Book of Colors, it started off with a story, a poem for my children to talk to them about colors. And then as I was writing the book, all of these images came into place. And I was just like, okay, well, I'm going to use these pictures to kind of illustrate part of the story. And that's the important part of it is you should be telling the story not just with your words, but you should also be telling it with your illustrations as well. Some things really shouldn't be said; it should be illustrated instead. And then while I was painting certain pictures, I was having to change elements of my story because it was like I didn't need to say that because it's in the book as an illustration, and then just going back and forth like that. So it took a little bit longer to illustrate the Book of Colors just because I did need to change things over because of my illustrations. But um, yeah, when you become an author, you're telling a story with your words, but then with the illustration aspect, you're telling a story with pictures, which I just find to be quite fun to do. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but I mean, I was always kind of a storyteller. We had been talking previously. I've literally read thousands and thousands of children's books. I worked with children for 10 years, and then I have 8 brothers and sisters. So I there was always books in the house.
Wow.
Yeah,
8.
yes, yeah, I'm one of 9.
Wow, that's a big family. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah, but yeah, there's so much storytelling that happens between children. So when we were kids, we were always like telling stories to one another. And actually recently found out that some of my siblings have actually continued telling the stories that I told them as children, that they tell it to their children, which I love.
Nice.
But I also completely forgot about it when I was a teenager. I had a small business where I was teaching artistry and writing to children as well. I actually completely forgot that I had done that. Um, so I actually just one of my siblings had reminded me of it the other day, and yeah, so promoting not just illustrations and writing for myself, but like teaching other people how to do it, but especially to teaching children because their creativity is like wild.
It's yeah, trying to capture that creativity and focus it, right? And give people confidence, I think is one of the biggest things. I think from an author perspective, I meet a lot of new authors that are struggling with confidence. But then as an artist as well, you're putting your work out there into the world going, I like it. I hope that someone else likes it. Like handing that painting to your surgeon, you're like, I kind of hope you like this, but I really did put a lot of heart and effort into this, and I really want to show my appreciation, but here you go. And then I can't imagine people being like, oh, this is the worst thing I've ever seen, and you're like, oh, my heart, so
Yeah.
it's hard when you put yourself out there. Um, did you struggle with that as an artist early on, and also as an author, putting your work out into the world and putting it under scrutiny from someone to look at it and give you their opinion of your work?
So to be honest, I actually have a small, tight-knit little beta reader group.
Smart.
So I highly recommend that people that are going to that you trust. And I'm not saying to like people that are going to constantly be like, oh, this is amazing, this is fantastic, this looks wonderful, nothing needs to change. You don't need that. What you need is somebody to be honest with you. Because I have some of my beta readers who read some of my books and they're like, this does not work, this does not flow. And then, I mean, my children are also beta readers because I print off some of my books and then I read it to my children and I'm like, okay, are they engaged? Are they actually listening to this story? Sometimes they aren't. I'll cut that part out or I'll change the wording or something like that. So what I highly recommend is to find that small little group that you can trust to give you positive and critical feedback. Not somebody who's going to be brutally honest and is going to tear you down. I did have one person in one of my beta pods that was reading something that I noticed that everything that they were bringing back to me was a harsh criticism. And like, as much as I appreciate a criticism, a harsh criticism is not something anybody really needs.
Right.
So I would recommend finding some people that you trust that can give you that honest feedback. And then because of having those small beta pods, I was able to put my stuff out to the world and not really feel so intimidating by it. And that's not just with my books, but it's also with certain parts of my artwork. I don't know. Like obviously, like people who are listening to the podcast can't see it, but behind me, I have a giant collection of artwork, kind of like hanging out on my wall behind me, and it's illustrations that I've done for fairies that correspond to the astrology. So all of the astrological symbols are attached to dancers that are actually fairies, and I had beta, like I guess testers, where I tried out different designs of different dancers with different types of wings in different color palettes, and then got everybody's feedback on it, and that's how different ones were created. So that's something that I would recommend.
That's a great tip for authors that are listening, is to get that feedback. That's a great idea. I've heard people mention having beta groups and having beta readers. Is it hard to start that group? How do you find these people?
I just went onto my Facebook, and because like everybody on my Facebook is like a friend. I don't have people who I don't know. If I've never met you in person, I don't know the name of your dog, we're not friends on Facebook.
I love that. What a great qualifier. I love that.
Yeah. So I just put a couple of feelers out there. So it's like, you know what? I have people on here who have children. I have people on here who have children that are in the age group that I'm looking for. Is there anybody here who would like to read my books to your children? And some people got back to me and they were like, oh, absolutely, I would totally do this for you. And then I send them a list of like, okay, I need you to look for consistency. I need you to look for grammar. I need you to look for, and I have a whole list of things that I need my beta readers to look for, because somebody's going to catch something that I will not. And the unfortunate thing is that I actually had it was a very small beta pod the very first time that I ever did it. And my first book that published went out with a glaringly obvious grammatical error. I did not catch. My beta pod did not catch. Wow. And the first like 10 readers did not catch. And I actually caught it after it had been sold about 100 times. So there are about 100 copies of my book out there with a very, very glaringly obvious grammatical error in it, which is unfortunate. But it happens, like I am not the first author to have something put out into the world with a grammatical error in it. I will certainly not be the last. And it's just a really funny anecdote. I still have one of the original 100. So it's just really fun for me to look back at it and be like, well, I started here. So it's not letting it happen again.
It's like a collector's edition. It's a special edition that only certain people have. You're one of the limited few that has this copy. Congratulations. Wow. Yeah. Like, yeah, that's amazing that you caught that afterwards. So, okay, talk a little bit more about your writing and kind of, I think we're talking about you have 4 books, the 4th book in the works right now, but talk a little bit about the titles of what you've written and a little more information about each of the books so far.
For sure. So the first one that I ever wrote was actually the alphabet book, and it's a Billy and Rory story. So I actually have a collection of books happening with the Billy and Rory stories, and they're all educational. So there's the alphabet book, there's the book of colors, and then I'm going to be getting into numbers and shapes and opposites, and it's just to help children learn different parts. Like obviously there are other books that are out there, but I wanted to illustrate my children into stories. So my children are Billy and Rory, and they talk to the reader and walk them through different things that they want to learn about. So the very first one was the alphabet book. And the very first time that I ever wrote the alphabet book was it was a poem and some illustrations that I was making for my son. He was very sick. He was in the hospital last year. He had a double ear infection that was antibiotic resistant. He was dehydrated. It was a very, very rough time there for a few months. My daughter was only I think she was like 6 weeks old when this all was happening.
Wow.
So it was just really hard, and like to try to make him feel better and to like kind of distract him, because I mean, he's in the hospital. He's not really feeling that great. We started talking about what he was interested in at the time. He wanted to learn about the alphabet. So we were figuring out like funny words that we could think of. So one of the things is Q for quokka, because we had learned about a little bit of Australia. So he really liked quokkas. So we did Q for quokka. So I drew a quokka for him. And he was looking at it and he was like, Mama, it needs to be pretty. And I was like, oh, well, what could we do to make it pretty? And he's like, she needs flowers. So I put flowers in her fur because that's what he wanted. So now in my book, I have a quokka with big fluffy cheeks who is wearing a daisy crown. But yeah, so the illustrations, the poem that are in the alphabet book are actually ones that I wrote for my son when he was in the hospital. And then the next one that came out was When Dinosaurs Dream. And that was my second one. And I actually wrote it when my son was about 8 weeks old. He was going through a really bad regression. He was not sleeping. I was exhausted. And I remember I actually wrote it in one night. And I was rocking him in my bed, in the rocking chair. I was rocking him and just singing to him very gently. And then all of a sudden, like this story started to form in my head. And I'm rocking him and I'm telling him this story. I actually I pulled my phone out and wrote it down in my notes app because I was just like, I don't want to forget this. Wow. So I wrote When Dinosaurs Dream when he was just a couple months old. And then I never touched it. It just kind of like sat in my notes app. And then I wrote my first book and I was like, let's turn this into a book and see how this goes. So I did the illustrations to When Dinosaurs Dream. And it's about a little boy who goes on an adventure to find his crib, and he meets a bunch of dinosaurs along the way. And they help him find his crib in the end. Yeah. So wow. that was my second book. But the fact that I wrote that in one night, like it wasn't even a full night. I probably wrote it in like an hour. Now I did go back to it. I kind of changed the wording on a few things, as you should. It shouldn't be like a one and done. You go back, read it again. The illustrations were a little bit harder for me with that one, because with my first book, the illustrations are very simplistic. There's a lot of white background to it. On one page is a little blurb of a poem. On the other side has like a small, like for example, the quokka with a giant Q up in the one corner. Yeah. So it's just a basic introduction, right? But with When Dinosaurs Dream, when that book came out, it's full page illustrations.
Right.
As opposed to my first one, which had a lot of white space. This one was more colorful. And then moving into the Book of Colors, which is the second installment in the Billy and Rory stories. And with that one, the feedback that I got on that was very unique, I guess, because some people that were reading it were very confused the first time that they were reading it. And then the feedback that I got from them was that they thought that there was a misprint, because the illustrations at the beginning of the book are in black and white. And people were very confused why a book of color was only in black and white. Wow. But then when you get into the story, every new color that the children encounter, when Billy and Rory encounter a new color, the new color gets added to the illustrations. So it starts going from black and white, then all of a sudden there's red, and then orange and yellow, and it goes through all of the colors of the rainbow. And at the end of the book, the pages are in full illustration, and very, very colorful. So people were very confused at the beginning. And then as they went into the book, it's like, oh, that makes sense. And people love this book. According to everybody who has got all three books, that one is their favorite. Their children are obsessed with that book, which I would love to figure out why. I think this one is it's an interactive book. So there's parts in it where it's actually asking children to put their hand on a certain part of a book and push a button and put the book on their head and twirl around. So it might be the interaction, it might be the illustration, it might be the poem, it might be all of it. I don't know, but people really like that book, which is very nice to hear.
What is the origin for that book? How did that book come to be?
My kids really were into the rainbow. We have a book called Go to Sheep, and it's a really, really punny story. My kids are obsessed with it. And in the book, there's one page where the sheep are talking about sheeping in full color or just black and white. And there's a rainbow on the one page. And we go through all of the colors of the rainbow. And my son knows the story of Roy G. Biv, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. It's the little boy who lives in a rainbow. Yeah. And Roy G. Biv is the, so R is red, O is orange, etc. But my son was very upset because in Go to Sheep, they didn't have indigo and violet. They only had purple. So indigo and violet are their own unique colors. And he was very upset that there was not an indigo and violet. It was just purple. So I wrote the book of colors so that he could have his indigo and violet.
Nice. See, So that's the kind of information for someone who's looking to buy a book for their family. They're on a website, they're on your website, they're on a wherever to buy a book, and they're looking at this book going, it looks interesting, but I just wish I knew a little bit more about the story behind it. I know we can read the description, but it's a great story that now people are going to connect with and go, I need this. I need the book of color. I need this in my life for my kids. I can't wait to have it. So I love hearing these stories.
Well, I really like talking. I feel really bad saying that. I like talking about my books because I like to share it with other people, especially because literacy is such an important thing in people's lives, right? Like literacy is connected to so much. And I like writing the children's books because it promotes the attachment between the parents and the children, not just through the stories and reading, but also through art. From what I've heard from some people is that they try to take the illustrations that I have in my books and they recreate it at home, which is wonderful to see because the parents are helping with that. And I don't know if you are aware the importance of art and literacy between the attachment between the parent and the child. But it's actually, they've done studies on it and how much it promotes the attachment between parent and child when they engage in creative endeavors. So it's really cool to see.
Amazing. Your kids must enjoy having mom at home who can create these characters and bring them to life. Story time, bedtime must be a thrill for your kids to kind of go down a path with you and do character development and create book ideas just by having you tell them stories. It's got to be a fun place to grow up as a kid.
I think that they enjoy it. I have heard a few times that they love the books. We read them all the time, which I don't know. Personally, I'm not sure if they like it because they know I wrote it or if they like it because they're in the stories.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting because there are a few phrases that happen in certain parts of the books, and I've heard my son say them to my daughter. It's like there's one part in the alphabet book. It's like, "Come along, Rory, let's see the next letter." And we were at the park the other day, and he's like, "Come along, Rory, let's go see the next slide." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh." That was so sweet to hear.
No.
But like they're taking certain parts of the books. And the thing is that I took these stories based on how my children interact with one another, because I heard my son say that to my daughter one time, "Come along, Rory." And so I included it in the book. But because he hears it a little bit more now, because it's in the book, he says it more often to his sister. So he's very, very vocal with her, and she's learning so much because of the stories. Like she knows her colors now because of the book of colors. She's 16 months old.
Wow.
Like if you point to a color, she can tell you exactly what that color is, which is wild. but we read them all the time.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's amazing. What is the age range for the children's books? What are we thinking about here for when we purchase this?
So these are geared to children under about 7 years old and under.
Okay.
That being said, I have had children who are 7, 8, and 9 who have read the alphabet book and the book of colors. And they like the rhyme, the story that goes along with it. They're not so much into the illustration aspect of it, but the rhyme is something that they're really into. And I've heard from some of the parents that their children are starting to write their own stories because they hear this poem and they're like, I can do that too, which is incredible to hear. I'm
Mm.
so excited that these children are getting excited for writing and for reading and for illustrations. But I'm really excited to hear that the children are wanting to do it too.
Talk about like beyond the original intent of why you wrote, to see
Right.
that kind of grow in your community and see people's responses. That's got to be pretty rewarding and powerful for you as an author to see how your book impacts people. That's got to be exciting.
Oh, it is. It's heartwarming, I think, is the first time that I realized what was going on. And like there's that part in the Grinch where like his heart grows and like you can really feel it. And it literally like my heart started racing, but it was like I was really excited, like, oh my gosh, like this is amazing. I'm so happy. It was wonderful.
So beyond writing for children, and there's some amazing resources there, you're branching out as an author. Talk about the project you're working on. Don't give us all the information, but just a little insight. What's coming up down the road for you?
So I am working on a fiction book. So it's called "It's a Beautiful Day, Wallace," and it's a novel. It's my very first novel. I wrote it for the first time 10-ish years ago for NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month.
Yeah.
Thought that it would be a cool idea to just try it out, see if I could do it. And I finished NaNoWriMo with "It's a Beautiful Day, Wallace." It was not well written, but the story flowed. But it's just the technical stuff of like the story itself is pretty nice. But I'm updating it right now to coincide with what has happened in the last 10 years of the world, just to kind of include it because it's a story about these two people who meet on a park bench and they just happen to tell each other their life stories. And there's kind of like flashbacks and then like the modern time and things like that. So I just that's what I'm working on right now. It's a little bit different than working on something for children. There's a little less illustration involved, but it's really fun. I'm enjoying the process.
And you said you wrote that years ago, and you just found that most recently, and you're like, oh wow, I almost forgot about this book or this writing.
Yeah.
And then you said earlier that you forgot that you taught students how to do art and you taught them. I'm like, there's these things that keep coming back for you that seem to be like, oh yeah, I did that in the past, and here it is again in front of me. That's exciting that you can stumble upon these things you've done in the past and give them new life. That's amazing.
I was telling my husband about it. He's just like, you forget a lot of stuff. I was like, I forget stuff all the time. That's why I write everything down. I've got books and books and books. I wrote an entire book and it's on a floppy disk.
And for those people at home, that's something for your computer. Yes, yeah. Very good.
So I wrote that back in like 2003.
Wow.
So 20 years ago, which is wild. But I was in high school at the time. I wrote an entire novel and it's like 600-ish pages. It's a long one. And it's a fantasy book and there's like a whole world involved in it. And I 100% forgot about it until I happened across a Coil notebook that was very old, very dated. I just happened to be going through some paperwork here in my office and I was just like, what is this? Opened it up and I was like, I forgot about that. And then the floppy disk was in there and I was like, okay, well, I need to find the floppy disk. And then one of my friends had a little thing that I could use for the floppy disk. And then I was just like, okay, let's download that. Let's get that. So,
wow.
I feel really bad that I forget a bunch of projects that I work on, but I got a lot of stuff going on. I'm busy.
I love it. There's no end to what you're working on in the past and in the present, which is kind of cool. I like that.
Yeah.
One thing we talked about before we hit record was you're building something out for authors as a resource, and I really want to touch on this. your connection with Canva and how it can help authors. You're building out like a list of things and some kind of teachings and ideas and some things that authors can put into place in regards to Canva. Can you talk a little bit about what you're pulling together on your website?
For sure. I will start this by saying I am not sponsored by Canva at all.
Yeah,
but if
either
they
am I.
wanted,
Yeah.
if they wanted to be sponsoring me, I 100% will promote them because I use it all the time.
All the time.
But yeah, so I was trying to figure out how to publish my book, how to self-publish a book, and I was looking online, and a bunch of people were saying, use this app, use that app, and I was trying a bunch of stuff. Nothing was working for me. And you know what works? Canva. And it works so well because you can put it to the size of document that you want to have for your book. I have a couple of books in different sizes, and I 100% love that. And then when you make your book, I love it that you can set on the mobile app. I will say this on the mobile app. It's better because you can actually read through your book as if you were flipping through the pages of an actual book. Whereas on the desktop version, it does not have that option. So just something to check out.
Yeah.
But on my website, I have developed a resource little list. It just got started. I can't say list. There's one thing on it. But I'm working on some other ones right now. For example, like how to hire an artist, or illustrator rather. How to actually, one of them is how to hire an artist for people who have wanted to get like a commission done. Like, how do you do that? There's one for how to self-publish a kid's book. There's one for how to actually storyboard. So I'm working on all of these right now, and I'm working on them in Canva because it's amazing. But one of the things on that how to self-publish a children's book is one of the important things that I had been talking to somebody else about this was the importance of font, because not a lot of people think about the font that they're utilizing. The font that you use, especially in a children's book, needs to be readable. It needs to be accessible. And it doesn't need to look pretty, as long as it's readable and it's accessible for people, because there are children who are going to be reading it who are just very new beginner readers, and they need a font that is accessible to them. So something that looks really cool and is like, there's one on there, I think it's called Cupcakes. But it's all capital letters, which is not something that you want to use with young readers. Yeah. So just making sure that the font that you choose is something that is readable for everyone.
Smart. And so that's going to, it's going to be coming to your website in the future then, right?
Yeah. So I have it on there right now, but there is only the one thing right now. Yeah, but as I get more done, more will be uploaded, and it's just going to be a free library that people can access. There's going to be some like PDF downloads, some just really quick like JPEGs of something you can just like zoom in on and check out. So
beautiful.
Just to help out. I don't mind helping out.
Well, that's the nice thing too, is that because you've done this and, you know, you've written the books and you're an illustrator as well, you come with some pretty unique perspectives for authors who are new, who wouldn't know what you know. And I think that's the one thing all of us struggle with a little bit. I have it maybe a little bit with podcasting, where I know certain things and it's just normal. I'm like, yeah, just do this, click this, do the thing. And people are like, how do you know these things? Well, I just know. And for you, it seems like, well, I just know these things. Like it feels odd to charge money for my knowledge, but there's a big gap out there of people who do not know what you know and are willing to support you by paying you for your knowledge. And that's something I think that we all need to kind of embrace a little bit more, because there's value. You're giving value by pulling all this information together, and you have value because you know what you're talking about, because you've lived it. So that should be recognized, I think, by anyone out there. We would pay for this knowledge because you're going to save us time and money as we try to figure it out. You've already done this. You've walked the path. I'm going to just pay you and learn from you. I think that's a smart thing that we can do as consumers, is to support other authors who are out there doing this and willing to help teach us. So I'm encouraging you to put that out there and charge people for your knowledge, because people are looking for a reason to support you. And I think that's something really important.
Yeah. I've had a few people telling me that I need to charge for things rather than giving them away for free.
Yeah.
But like I was actually thinking about this earlier today. I was like, if I'm going to be charging for a course or something, I'm going to give some stuff away for free, get my feet a little wet first, which is where the free resource library is coming into place. So I think for the next few months anyway, it's going to be a lot of free content just to get people kind of understanding where I'm coming from. And then just, I think the more in-depth stuff, like how to lay out properly on Canva might be something that would be like a paid course.
Yeah.
But I do have an option on my website right now, which is of becoming a patron. And that's not just for my books, it's also for my art. So there's things like you can get a digital download for your wallpaper. You can get, I have over 150 art tutorials that I made. And they're all just kind of hanging out on my website. So I was just like, let's throw that into like a little tutorial membership thing. And that one's only $6 a month to access 150 tutorials.
Wow.
To go along with that, my YouTube only has like 9 videos. So, I mean, this was at the start of like 2020 when I started recording them. So I will admit they're not the greatest quality. So I was very new to being on camera, and I'm just as awkward in person as I am on camera. So,
Love it.
yeah, but yeah, we were talking a little bit beforehand about like the importance of like hiring an illustrator and everything like that. Like a lot of people don't know, like to me it's common knowledge because I went through the process of everything, right? So I guess it's not quite so common knowledge, but learned knowledge. So I don't mind sharing details about how people can do things like that.
Yeah, I think again we won't jump into your bank account like we mentioned earlier, but some principles and some thoughts around if I'm a new author and I'm trying to hire an illustrator, how, like for me, for one example, I'm thinking if I was a new author wanting a children's illustrator for my book, I might be thinking of writing more than one book in a series, and I want to have the same author come back in the future as I write more versions and more as I grow my series. I want to know that I have the same person available to me a year from now that will come back and keep the consistency of all my books so they look and feel the same. I don't want to go hire another person and have them try to emulate what my first illustrator did. So how do I have that conversation with an illustrator at the beginning saying, listen, I'm thinking about writing 5 books. This is book 1. Can we work together in the future? How do I secure that kind of arrangement knowing that I have more books coming?
So if somebody were to contact me and say, "Hey, like I want to do a series of books, would you be my illustrator?" I would ask immediately for a contract.
Okay.
Because I could illustrate something and they could use it for their first book, but if I don't have that contract in place, they could hire another artist to do like similar artistry for the next book and not have me come back for it. So to protect the intellectual property that is mine, I would want to have a contract in place. But also, I think authors need to be realistic about what they are going to be spending on an illustrator. And to be comfortable with that, especially because their traditional number of pages for a children's book is about 32 pages. And most illustrators will charge per page. There also is going to be in your contract a revision clause, and the revision clause is there to protect the illustrator. It really stinks to think of it from the author's perspective, because yes, you do want to make those changes to your book, but there's only so many times that an illustrator can make certain changes, and they're always going to be small changes. If you want to change something large, like adding an additional character, or maybe you want to change like a scene in its entirety, that means that the illustrator has to redo the entire thing. And it just takes so much more for the illustrator to do. And as an author illustrator, I will say it is significantly harder to make a children's book from the author's perspective, from the illustrator's perspective, because I was able to write When Dinosaurs Dream in an hour. It took me about 8 weeks to illustrate it.
Wow.
So just thinking about it in that kind of respect, especially depending on the type of illustration that you want to go for, because there's digital art, of course, and then there's what I do, which is the watercolor. Llama Llama was done in acrylics. So it's really up to you, the kind of style design that you want to have in place. Something that is like a full illustration page is going to cost way more than something that is just a very basic, as I mentioned before, a quokka with daisies in its head with a white background. That would not cost very much. But something that is a full page color, like what I have in one of my, like the book of colors, that would be significantly more.
Okay.
So that's just something for people to keep in mind.
The one thing I know that there's options out there that are minuscule amounts of money, and the websites are made around paying very little for people's talents and artistic ability and music and voiceovers and artwork. We all know these websites. What I'm afraid of is hiring someone that I don't know who takes someone else's material possibly and then gives it to me as if it's original work. And I put it in my book and I start selling it. And then I get a knock at the door like, hey,
cease and desist.
That's my artwork. But I paid somebody to do this, but I didn't know all of the things. So hiring somebody and working with somebody one-on-one like this, I think is probably the safest way to have good quality artwork that lives into the future. I did something with music. I have one of my podcasts. I wanted music. I could go hire somebody that I don't know to create music for my show and hope and pray they did it right. Because once I put it out into YouTube and out into the world, I could get into a whole lot of trouble if I do it wrong, even though I paid for it. So I went to an artist, actually who lives close to where you live, and hired him, and he made me my own music, and it's mine. No one else has this. And I have complete confidence going forward that this is my work. So from your perspective as an illustrator, having that relationship with an author, this your how you do your work as an illustrator can impact the author in the future if you're not doing it correctly. So it is important to work with someone like you and have that contract and have that arrangement, right?
Oh, absolutely. And to that respect, there also needs to be a safety measure in place for any kind of use outside of the book.
Right.
Because if there's a clause in the contract from the illustrator saying that, you know, the illustrations for the book are made for the book, the author can't then, you know, take an image out of the book and use it for merchandising. So you can't put it on a shirt. You can't put it on a mug. Unless you have that exclusivity clause in there and you have paid the illustrator for that purpose. If the illustrator says, no, you can't put it on a mug, you cannot put it on a mug. They say, no, you can't put it on a book bag, you cannot put it on a book bag. Because yes, you're paying the illustrator, but you have not paid for the rights to put it on merchandise. So that is something that is important for authors to be aware of.
Right.
If you want to be able to make a bookmark or a mug or a book bag, you need to pay the illustrator to use it in that respect.
Okay, from your perspective then, this is great information. Does the onus lie on the author to ask the question of the illustrator? Can I use the artwork elsewhere? Or does it rely on the illustrator to remind the author that of what you just said? Where do you think the onus lies, author or illustrator, for that conversation?
Honestly, I would think in a mutual respect relationship between author and illustrator, it is on both. It is on both, especially if you have an author who is a seasoned author approaching an illustrator who is very green and you don't bring it up.
Nice.
I don't think that that's right. And it's the same way if you have a very green author and they're approaching an illustrator and they don't think to ask that question. Maybe the illustrator's never done a children's book before. They might not know. In that kind of respect, you know, that conversation eventually is going to transpire. If the illustrator happens to see the author doing it and says like, oh, hey, by the way, we didn't talk about that. So that's something that needs to be considered as well. But if the illustrator is any type of a good illustrator, they will know, like, not like a good illustrator, but if they've been seasoned, if they've done a children's book before, they'll know what parameters they want to have in place for their intellectual property.
And the jump back to, I think you said earlier that it's when we're getting quotes on a children's book in particular, talking to an illustrator, it's per page, not per book.
Right.
Right.
You're looking anywhere between $75 to up to $200 per page.
Per page, people. I can see people pulling over on the side of the road right now going, wait, rewind.
Yeah.
Really? Wow.
Anywhere from 75 to 200. And it's all relative to how long it's going to take to do a page. Yeah. But in there's also that revision clause that I had mentioned,
right?
Because that protects the illustrator for revision. Now, if somebody were to approach me, and it's happened before, asking if I can illustrate their children's book, and then I do mention that I have the revision clause in there where I will take up to 2 minor illustration changes. And people are like really hesitant on that because what if they want to change the book? It's really important from the author's perspective that your book is done before you approach an illustrator.
Good.
It needs to be done.
Yeah.
So that's just something that authors need to keep in mind.
So it's not a work in progress. I've got 2 chapters of my 10. Can I get my illustrator? No. Wait till it's done.
Yeah, because as an illustrator, I would not touch an incomplete book. Okay. I would need it to be completely done. And then talk to me about like what kind of characters you wanted, what kind of design elements you'd like. Is there a specific color palette that you were interested in? Now, a lot of authors might think like, what's a color palette? How would I know? You can approach the illustrator and just be like, I don't know what like color palettes are. Can you explain this to me? And I would be more than happy to like throw to somebody like, okay, well, this is like a natural kind of color palette. And you'll see a lot of like greens and yellows and oranges and things like that. So illustrators will know what to do in that respect. If you don't know, it's okay to ask questions.
Yeah. And I like always asking people, what does good look like to you? Give me an example of what you admire as maybe another book that the artist really nailed it. And then you can kind of get in their heads and go, okay, I can see you love watercolors. You're a watercolor person. Okay, that makes sense. All right, now I know where you're heading. So that's always good to ask.
Yeah, most illustrators will also have a portfolio that you can review on their website. And it's really important to make sure you are connecting with the right illustrator. I've had people approach me and they're like, hey, can you illustrate my book? And then I'm reading it and I'm like, well, I don't illustrate that kind of stuff. Like there's just something that's just a little bit too, grown up. I had somebody ask me if I could do like adult illustrations for an adult style children's book. It's geared to adults, but with like the wording which is not something I do. So it's really important as an author to access illustrators that are like that have that style that you're looking for, that do the kind of projects that you're doing. So somebody approached me and said, hey, like I'm doing a nursery rhyme book and this is for, children that are 0 to 12. I want something a little bit more lighthearted, something that's a little bit more like bright and would you do something like that for me? Absolutely. Because that is my style. My style is for those younger children who want that like vibrancy, that like, or the on the flip side of that, those calming, feathery kind of illustrations,
Yeah.
So it's really important to just connect with somebody that is doing illustrations that you are familiar with. You can also, if there's an illustrator that you really, really want to work with, find some other children's books with illustrations you like that you want to see your book with, and then send those to the illustrator and be like, this is what I like. Can you do something in this style? Because there have been times where I've gone out of my own comfort zone to do a project that I wouldn't normally have taken on just because I believe in the project.
Nice. Yeah.
So,
anything else stand out from an illustrator's point of view that an illustrator and an author should have in those beginning conversations around working together? Anything else that we should touch on?
Open communication, I think, is just like the biggest thing. Definitely being honest with one another. And if it's in the author's best, it's like I had mentioned it before about the whole merchandising situation, because I had this happen to me where somebody took one of my illustrations and they started branding with it, which was not in our clause. We did not have an agreement to do that. If you change your mind, if you have a contract saying that you aren't going to be doing something like this, it's okay to change your mind. Message the illustrator and be like, you know what, I changed my mind. Can we do a revision? Can we do something past this because I would like to do this more? And then pay the illustrator for that.
Right. Yeah.
No, like it not just for myself. It's for, I've had a couple of illustrator friends who have had this kind of thing happen to them. So if you are going to be reaching out to some place, like there are certain ones like Fiverr. So just be aware too that those cheaper ones, especially with the how popular AI is right now, they are cheaper
Yes.
for a reason. So just be aware of that. You might not be getting exactly what you bargained for. So yeah,
Be
AI
careful.
is, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. AI has some amazing tools that can help all of us, but at the same time, it's a little unregulated and a little bit of the Wild West. So you might as well work with a professional that you can talk to who is a human and can actually, give you advice and walk you through the steps at the same time. So Rae, I love all of your advice and your tips for people, especially for those new authors that are listening. I know, and we talked about this, and you're like, I know you want to support people and give those free resources. I know, though, that I know specifically there's authors that would pay for this kind of interaction on camera like this to sit and talk to you and kind of bounce ideas off of you, whether it's maybe a buy me a coffee link on your website where they can give you a donation for your time or paying you for your time to sit and talk like this about their books. But I would encourage you to have something like that because you are a wealth of information and there's so many things that that you could help so many people with. Continue giving the great free advice and free tips. That I love that. But I would also love to encourage you to charge people for your talents and your abilities, because beyond the watercolors and the paintbrush and the pens, there's also you, and you have a lot to give for people. So I know there's going to be people wanting to reach out and talk to you and willing to pay you for your time. So please allow us the opportunity to do that in some form, because you, again, have so many gifts and talents to share with us. So thank you for sharing with us. I feel like I need to check my cushions of my couch now and send you something for your time. But thank you for being available and sharing all this great wisdom with everyone.
I'm glad to help with anything. So if anybody does have any questions, I did mention this beforehand. Feel free to send me an email. I don't mind.
There you go.
So yeah,
awesome.
I'm glad to help.
Okay, so Rae, on that topic, how do we connect? Where are you most active on social media? Where do we find all things Rae?
I am unfortunately pretty prevalent on social media. I like my social media. That's actually one of my big things that I tell authors and illustrators all the time is you need to be on social media.
Another tip for everyone right there. Yes, go.
Yes. So on Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram, I am at Rae Wright Artistry. So RAE and then Wright, WRIGHT, and then Artistry. You'd think I'd have a more like creative name as an art business, but I do not. And then on YouTube, I am also Rae Wright Artist because for some reason Artistry was taken.
Nice. So we'll put all those links in the show notes and your email address for people to want to reach out and talk to you as well.
Oh, those free resources on my website is raewrightartistry.ca/resources.
Resources. Perfect. Yeah. And I'm on the website right now and it's gorgeous. You have to go and see all of Rae's amazing things. It's so cool. I love the pictures of dog and it's like multicolored. There's creams and it looks like a collie, I think. Some kind of like a collie dog.
Oh, is that I think that's the Australian Shepherd.
There you go.
The pastel one?
Yeah, it's got like black and copper. It's gorgeous. Yeah. So nice.
Thank you.
And then your pictures of moms with their children and babies. It's just like, everyone has to go check it out. raewrightartistry.ca, because it's a Canadian website and we love Canadian artists. So, Rae, thank you so much for making time to be on the podcast. And come back when your novel's ready as well. We'd like to have you back and celebrate that in the future as well.
I appreciate that. I would love to talk about it. It needs to be finished first. So that one's also going to be a self-published one because I like the creative control.
There you go. It's awesome. And everyone, go check out all the artwork and let Rae know about that you heard here on the podcast. And Rae, thank you so much for being part of the show.
Thanks for having me. It was great.
Thanks for checking out Living the Next Chapter. Happy to have you here. And here at the end, I want to just put this shout out to authors listening. If you want to sell more books, if you want to build community, one of the best ways you can do that is by guesting on podcasts and or having your own podcast. So I have a podcast called the How to Podcast series, and I help people start podcasts. I also do editing. I also help with social media, website design. I do all those things in addition to being the host of this podcast and the 6 other podcasts that I do, including How to Podcast series. I think you would be the perfect person to start a podcast. I would love to help you. Head over to howtopodcast.ca, howtopodcast.ca. Reach out, let me know if you're interested in starting a podcast, and I want to work with you. Thanks for listening to Living the Next Chapter. Catch you on the next one. Take care.
Mindshift Power Podcast, the podcast for teenagers and those who work with them. There's a huge problem in America today. There's a very large disconnect between teenagers and the adults who work with them. I'm looking to bridge that gap with real, raw, honest conversation, not held back by the chains of political correctness. You cannot solve a problem you do not understand. Want to understand teenagers today? Listen to this podcast. This podcast is for teens in the U.S. and Canada. To learn more, go to fatimabay.com/podcast or just look for Mindshift Power Podcast on any listening platform. I look forward to you being a faithful listener.